This is going to be another HDRI Kaleidoscope. If you've not seen this first video, then I recommend you do so. It's going to be more or less along the same lines, but I'm going to throw in a few variations, and I've come up with a different way to make the initial mirrored box. So I'm going to begin by selecting the infinite plane and deleting it. Then I'm going to go to the Create library, go to Additional Primitives. These were made by Rashad and they're very useful. I'm going to select this one called Three-Sided Column. Check out of there, go to Edit, and I'm going to hold the Shift key down and rotate this so that it is facing the camera. Side view, keyboard shortcut 3. Enlarge this and place it so that the back edge is behind this point here. This represents the field of view, and this point represents where it's actually viewing from. So as long as this back edge is behind that, then everything will be fine. I'm going to use Ctrl C and Ctrl V to copy that shape, and then use a conversion tool to make that a cube. The cube adopts the bounding box of the shape, which is just slightly larger than the shape, which is useful for us for what we're going to do. What I want to do is just take this edge here and move it back slightly so the initial shape is poking out the front. The attributes of this box want to be changed to positive, check out of there, and then the inner shape, the attributes want to be negative, check out of there, select both of them, group them, and then modify the material. So reset to default grey, get rid of the diffuse, make it a perfectly reflecting mirror, and get rid of shadow casting. And that, if everything's been done right, switch to the camera view, perspective camera view, keyboard shortcut 1, will give us our mirrored box for the kaleidoscope effect. The next thing we're going to need, I've just switched the overhead view now, keyboard shortcut 2, is the lens to get everything projected onto the end here. So while I've got this group selected, I'm just going to extend that slightly so I get a few more reflections in shot, like so. And then I'm going to select this cube, which is positive, and go Ctrl C, Ctrl V. Hold Ctrl and Alt down and click on a corner to reset it to its default scale, and then move this forward along the Z-axis so it's out of the way of everything, and then enlarge it a bit. I don't know exactly what size it's going to be. I'll just zoom in on that. Use Ctrl C, Ctrl V and the conversion tool to turn it into a sphere. Then reselect the cube, hold the Alt key down, and reduce its width to half that of the sphere. Now the attributes for this can be made negative, so that's going to be the cutter. Select both of these, group them, and modify the material. I'll just reset to default grey, get rid of the diffusion, make it fully transparent, get rid of the refraction, set it right down to 0, and this will be the lens system. Now what I have to do is position this up to the end of my mirrored box. I'll do this from the side view along the Z-axis, so that's halfway along there, and then switch to the end view, which is keyboard shortcut 4, and just make sure that the sphere, which is a circle we're viewing from this direction, is aligned nicely with this equilateral triangle. So I'm just trying to get these three corners in the middle of this circle, and just shrink it down so that it's an appropriate size. So just a bit lower there, that looks about right. So I've just done that by eye, no doubt there's a way to calculate it correctly. Now my perspective camera, I'm just going to line up with my shape, and when I give this a render now, we should have the repeating pattern. These bits that are black are because we don't have enough ray depth, so I'll switch to render options and increase ray depth to 12, and then I'm going to go to document setup and make it square, and then I'm going to give that a render and see how I need to modify my field of view. So I want to get as many repeats in as possible without any black areas appearing on the edge where I've run out of ray depth and there are not enough bounces. So that's a dark area there. This one here, that's the bit that's pointing in the most. So if I can get that just outside this edge, that'll be super. So I just have to keep trying. That looks about right to me. So there we go. That is now ready for the next step. The next step is to go to a selection of HDRI images, whatever you've got. I've got a few here that Haro and I have made. They're synthetic, so they've been made in another program. They haven't been captured from photographs. I'm going to select this one, which is one I made and Haro has modified, so it has got a good dynamic range to work, so that's handy. I'm going to use image-based lighting and rendering scene, and I can use the rollerball here to rotate this round and get various patterns. You can see this is actually an almost monochrome image. But I don't have to stick with just that. As I did in the previous video, when I've got something that I think might be interesting, I'm going to use the cube that I saved, which was there, I think, from the abstract video. That one there. Okay, right, so what I'm doing now is just resizing and repositioning this box so it's outside our lens system and the mirrored box we've created. There you go. And you can see now that that's changed things quite radically, and I can continue to experiment with the position of this, so it doesn't have to be perfectly aligned on the end there. You'll get different effects depending where this cube is positioned, how large it is, for example, how many of them you include in your scene. So Control C, Control V, and you can stack them, you can offset them. Just try to make sure you don't get this back edge into shot, otherwise it will interfere with the camera view, though that will create different effects as well. They may not be desirable ones. So by having two, you get quite a amplification of the light, which is a pleasing effect. If it's getting too bright, you can lower the output here. This isn't a very good preview because it doesn't have the same ray depth as our render scene. So let's try 12. So that's reduced the intensity quite a lot. So we should be able to see a bit more detail in here before it gets burned out completely. So there's an option. And likewise, once you've got things set up, you can just swap it out for any other different HDRIs you happen to have and see what the effect is. Ooh, that's really bright. Again, you can lower this value and rotate it around, perhaps so that's not, that bright area is not entirely in shot, just the edge of it is. Let's give that a go. So you go, that's it's maybe not that interesting an option on that one. Perhaps it's a bit too simple. Let's oops, not going for that. Go for one of these with more stars in. Let's try this one. Oh, that's really bright. Okay, rotate that around. So you can see it's quite easy to have a lot of time-consuming fun messing around with these till you can find something you like the look of. And my problem is I tend to like the look of nearly all of them. Which means that you really do lose a lot of time doing that. If you want to speed the render up, you can lower the ray depth down and narrow the field of view. So I've lowered the ray depth there. I can just narrow the field of view in. I get less. There's less overlaps in the pattern, so the pattern will come out a little bit simpler. Which, depending on the image you're using as your source of these patterns, then that will determine how many times you want to see that repeating. If you want more complexity, add the maximum ray depth, widen the field of view. If you want less complexity, then take things in the other direction. And also the complexity of your initial high dynamic range image will modify that. Here's another variation of the strip lights, which is quite pleasingly symmetrical. I rather like that effect. So I'm going to pull that back and maybe rotate it slightly, see what happens. I'm not sure. I've not really tried any of these things out. It's just a matter of experimenting with them. We're getting a bit of burnout in the middle there. So to compensate for that, lower this value of the intensity. Like so. You can see more of the effect where it's overlapping there. Zoom in again. See what that looks like. Quite like that. Try something else. I'll go back to Horo's neon wires, which worked well on the last one. See what that's come out like. This has got a lot of colour variations in it. There's other things you can do. You can play with this group here. So the entire group, if you hold the Alt key down and squash it, then that will change how much of the background it captures. And the other thing you might consider doing, though this is a risky proposition, is if you get this outer cube here, you can modify the noise function. So this one was just basic distance origin, but you can choose other ones like waves, for example, and modify the frequency, and you'll get different effects. It'll introduce other bump patterns into the surface, so it'll distort the images in different ways. So I rather like that. It's created quite an interesting pattern just at random. It could do perhaps with being a bit brighter. I could increase the intensity That would be one way, or I could increase the number of reflections. That will increase the complexity a bit. Maybe that's looking a bit too complex, I don't know. It's difficult to judge until it's finally rendered out, but considering I've gone on for 10 minutes, I'll call that it, and let that render out and use that image for the intro shot. So I hope you found that interesting, and that you'll have a go at doing this with your own HDRI backdrops or any other thing you want to stick into a kaleidoscope and see what happens. Cheers now.